I used to call him my safe option. Not out loud, not in a cruel way, just in my head. The way you label things when you don't want to look too closely at them. Safe job, safe neighborhood, safe guy, someone you can lean on without worrying you'll fall too far. Matthew was that for me. We met 3 years ago at a mutual friend's birthday thing I didn't even want to go to. I remember clocking him immediately calm, steady presence, the kind of guy who listens more than he talks. He laughed quietly, didn't dominate the room, didn't try to impress anyone. When he asked what I did for work, he actually waited for the answer instead of scanning the room for someone hotter. That should have meant something. It didn't. Not yet. We slid into a rhythm almost immediately. Coffee on Sundays. Random texts about nothing. Helping each other move furniture. He became the person I defaulted to when plans fell through, when dates flopped, when I didn't want to be alone but also didn't want anything complicated. And that's the thing. I told myself I didn't feel anything because it felt easy. Matthew never made my heart race. He didn't give me butterflies. He didn't keep me up spiraling at night. He just showed up. On time. Every time. With takeout when I was too tired to cook. With silence when I didn't want to talk. With a hand on my back that never lingered too long, never asked for more. So I assumed that meant there was nothing there. I dated other guys. Flashier ones. Emotionally unavailable ones. Men who made me feel chosen and then disappeared. Matthew knew all of it. He never judged, never warned me, just listened and nodded like my bad decisions were whether unfortunate, but expected. Sometimes I caught him watching me in that quiet way of his, like he was holding a thought just behind his teeth. I always looked away first, because habits don't scare you. Feelings do. The first time the thought crept in that something might be wrong with my logic, I brushed it off immediately. We were sitting on his couch, knees barely touching, watching some stupid documentary neither of us was actually following. I leaned my head back and laughed at something dumb he said, and he smiled at me in this soft, almost fond way. For half a second, my chest tightened. Not excitement, not lust, recognition. I told myself it was nothing. Comfort can feel intense if you're not used to it. That became my favorite lie. The truth was, Matthew had slowly become woven into my life so thoroughly that I stopped noticing where I ended and he began. He knew my coffee order. He knew when I was lying about being fine. He knew which silences meant peace and which ones meant I was drowning. And because he never demanded a label, I never gave him one. I mistook consistency for neutrality, presence for passivity. I thought love was loud. I thought if it didn't knock the air out of me, it didn't count. It didn't occur to me until much later that maybe the reason I felt so calm with him wasn't because I didn't care. Maybe it was because I already did. The realization wasn't a lightning strike. It was quieter than that. A shift. Like noticing you've been holding your breath and finally letting it go. And once I noticed it, I couldn't unsee it. The problem with realizing you're already in love is that it forces you to re-examine everything that came before it. Every text I'd answered casually. Every time I'd chosen someone else. Every night I'd gone home alone even though Matthew had offered to stay or asked carefully if I wanted company. I used to think he was just being polite, or lonely, or bored. Now I wasn't so sure. After that night on his couch, I started noticing things I'd trained myself not to see. The way he always waited to cross the street with me, even when he was clearly in a hurry. The way he remembered details I'd forgotten I'd told him. The way his voice softened when he said my name, like he was trying not to put too much weight on it. I didn't say anything. I didn't do anything different. I just observed. Like if I stayed quiet long enough, the feeling would pass. It didn't. A few weeks later, I went on a date that should have been good on paper. Attractive guy. Confident. The kind of smile people lean into. Halfway through, he reached across the table and brushed his thumb over my knuckles, clearly expecting something electric. I felt nothing. Not numbness, absence. Like the wrong key in a lock. I smiled, excused myself to the bathroom, and stared at my reflection longer than necessary. The first person I thought about wasn't the guy waiting for me outside. It was Matthew, sitting on his couch, letting me ramble, letting me exist without performing. That scared me more than any bad date ever had. When I got home, there was a message from Matthew waiting. Just a simple, "Dash you good?" No follow-up. No pressure. He always did that, left space for an honest answer. I typed, "Yeah," 3 times. Deleted it every time. Instead, I went over. We didn't talk about anything important at first. We ordered food. Complained about work. Sat too close. knees touching like it was accidental when it wasn't. I kept waiting for my heart to start racing, for the moment to feel cinematic. It didn't. What I felt instead was heavier, warmer, like settling into something that had been holding my shape for a long time. At one point, he reached for the remote, his arm brushing mine, and instinctively, I leaned in instead of away. He noticed. I know he did. His breath hitched, just barely, but he didn't move, didn't push, didn't assume. That's when it hit me, fully and unmistakably. I hadn't been avoiding feelings. I'd been avoiding risk. Calling him my safe option hadn't meant I didn't care. It meant I cared enough to be afraid of losing him. The realization didn't come with fireworks. It came with a quiet ache behind my ribs and a deep, almost painful calm, like standing on the edge of something real and knowing that stepping back would hurt worse than stepping forward. I didn't say anything that night. Neither did he. But when I left, he hugged me longer than usual. And this time, I let myself stay there. Let myself feel how right it was. On the walk home, the city felt strangely muted. Like everything had shifted half a degree and I was the only one who noticed. I understood then why habit can look like indifference from the outside. Sometimes love doesn't announce itself. Sometimes it waits patiently until you're brave enough to name it. After that night, nothing officially changed, which somehow made everything different. Matthew didn't suddenly touch me more, didn't flirt, didn't confess anything dramatic. He stayed exactly the same, and that consistency became impossible to ignore. It was like once you notice a sound in a room, you can't tune it out anymore. I started measuring my days by him without meaning to, saving stories to tell him, thinking, Matthew would like this dash, Matthew would get this joke dash. When my phone buzzed, I hoped quietly, embarrassingly, that it was him. When it wasn't, I felt a small, irrational disappointment I pretended not to feel. This was new territory for me. I was used to wanting people who kept me guessing. Wanting Matthew felt like standing on solid ground, and suddenly realizing how high the drop-off was. The moment that finally cracked me open came on a random Tuesday. Nothing cinematic about it. I'd had a rough day, one of those where everything piles up just enough to make you feel stupid for being overwhelmed. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't post about it. I just showed up at Matthew's place unannounced. He took one look at my face and said, "Hey," in that low, steady voice. No questions. No concern masked as curiosity. Just acknowledgement. We sat in silence for a while. I stared at the floor. He handed me a beer I barely touched. At some point, without thinking, I leaned sideways until my shoulder pressed into his. He stiffened for half a second, not pulling away, just registering it. Then he relaxed. I felt his hand settle against my knee. Still, grounding, not asking for anything. And something inside me broke open, not panic, not urgency, but relief. The kind that makes your eyes burn unexpectedly. "I think I've been really unfair to you," I said quietly. He didn't rush to respond. He never did. "How so?" I swallowed. "I think I treated you like background noise. Like you'd always be here no matter what." His thumb shifted once. "Barely perceptible. I chose to be here," he said. No accusation. Just truth. That hurt more than if he'd been angry. I didn't say, "I love you, dash." I didn't say, "I'm scared, dash." I didn't say any of the big things circling in my chest. I just let myself stay leaned into him, breathing at the same pace, letting the moment exist without naming it. For the first time, I wondered what it would be like to lose him, not hypothetically, not someday, but because of my own silence. The thought made my stomach twist. Habit had made me careless. Comfort had made me lazy. And calling it safe had been my way of avoiding responsibility for what it really was, attachment. When I finally stood to leave, he walked me to the door like always. Same routine, same quiet goodbye. But this time, before I stepped out, I turned back. "Matthew," I said. "Yeah, I don't want to take you for granted anymore." He studied me for a long second, like he was deciding whether to believe me. Then he nodded. "Okay." No pressure, no demand, just space for me to choose him back. I walked home slower than usual, the night air cool against my skin. I didn't feel resolved. I didn't feel brave, but I felt honest. And that felt like the first real step forward. After I said it, "I don't want to take you for granted anymore," I expected something to happen. A shift. A response that would tell me whether I'd just opened a door or quietly closed one. Instead, Matthew stayed exactly where he was. Which, I was learning, was kind of the point. We didn't see each other for a few days after that. Not because anything was wrong, but because life kept happening in its unremarkable way. Work deadlines, missed trains, groceries, the ordinary stuff that usually filled the space where feelings might have gone. Only now, the space felt louder. I caught myself wanting to reach for my phone and explain myself further. To clarify, to reassure him, to rush ahead and label what I was only just learning how to feel. But every time I did, I stopped. Because the truth was, I didn't want to manage this. I wanted to be in it. Matthew texted me first. Just a photo of a terrible-looking sandwich with the caption, "I regret this immediately." I laughed out loud. The sound surprised me. We met that weekend like we always did. Same CAF crud could. Same table by the window. Same 2 coffees we never bothered to switch up. If anyone had been watching us, they wouldn't have noticed anything different. That was the dangerous part, how easily we could keep pretending. But I noticed everything. The way his knee angled toward mine instead of away. The way he hesitated before talking, like he was checking in with me silently. The way his eyes searched my face when I went quiet, not to fix it, just to understand it. At one point, he said, "You've been thinking a lot." It wasn't a question. I nodded. "Yeah, about us." There it was. Calm, direct, no edge to it. I swallowed. "About how I got comfortable assuming you'd always be here." He didn't flinch. He just wrapped his hands around his cup, grounding himself. "I didn't mind being your constant," he said. "I just didn't want to be invisible." That landed softly, but it landed deep. I reached across the table then. Didn't grab his hand. Just rested my fingers near his, giving him the option. He looked down at the space between us, then closed the distance himself. His hand was warm, steady, real. No fireworks. Just a quiet click, like something finally lining up. Later, walking back to his place, the city felt slower somehow, like it was giving us time. We stopped at his door, neither of us rushing to end the moment. I was acutely aware of how new this was, not the closeness, but the honesty. "I'm bad at beginnings," I admitted. He smiled, small and knowing. "I'm patient." I believed him. We didn't kiss. Not yet. And somehow that made it feel more intentional, not less. Like we were choosing not to skip steps for once. When I finally turned to leave, he squeezed my hand once before letting go. A promise, not a pull. Walking home, I realized something that made me stop mid-step. I hadn't fallen in love all at once. I'd done something scarier. I'd stayed. Staying turned out to be harder than I expected. Not because Matthew made it difficult, he didn't, but because staying meant I couldn't hide behind my old habits anymore. I couldn't disappear for days chasing someone unavailable. I couldn't pretend distance was the same thing as independence. Being with him, even in this careful, undefined way, asked something of me I wasn't used to giving. Presence. We started doing more ordinary things together. Grocery runs, errands, sitting on opposite ends of the couch, scrolling on our phones, occasionally bumping feet like punctuation marks. It all felt dangerously domestic, and I loved it more than I admitted. Once, standing in line at a pharmacy, Matthew reached out without thinking and fixed the collar of my jacket. The gesture was small, automatic. When he realized what he'd done, his hand hovered for half a second before dropping back to his side. I didn't joke about it. I didn't deflect. I just smiled. The first real test came when an old pattern tried to pull me back. A guy I'd dated briefly months ago texted out of nowhere late, vague, inviting. The kind of message that used to light me up just enough to distract me from everything solid. I stared at my phone longer than I should have. Matthew was in the kitchen, humming quietly to himself while he cooked. Comfortable, unassuming, real. I felt the old reflex rise up, the urge to keep my options open, to not choose, to call it freedom. And for the first time, I saw it clearly for what it was, fear dressed up as flexibility. I deleted the message. I didn't tell Matthew about it. Not because I was hiding anything, but because I realized I didn't need to prove my loyalty. I just needed to practice it. That night, we sat close, legs tangled casually, his shoulder warm against mine. At some point he asked, "You okay?" "Yeah," I said. And this time, it was the truth. It happened a few days later, quietly, like everything else between us. We were lying on his bed, fully clothed, shoes kicked off on the floor, talking about nothing important. About a trip he wanted to take someday. About how neither of us slept well in unfamiliar places. I turned my head and found him already looking at me. No rush. No tension. Just a question in his eyes. I leaned in first. The kiss was soft, almost hesitant, like we were both checking to make sure this was allowed. His hand came up to my jaw, warm and steady, anchoring me there. I felt something settle into place inside my chest. Not explosive, not overwhelming. Right. When we pulled back, our foreheads stayed pressed together. He smiled like he was trying not to scare the moment away. "Still with me?" he asked quietly. I didn't answer right away. I just breathed him in. This man who had never chased me, never tested me, never tried to win. "Yeah," I said finally. "I'm here." Later, walking home alone, I thought about how easy it would have been to miss this. To confuse safety with boredom. To mistake habit for a lack of feeling. I'd spent so long looking for love that made me feel unstable, I almost overlooked the one that made me feel whole. And this time, instead of running from that feeling, I let myself rest in it. Once we crossed that line, once the word, "here," meant something, everything slowed down in a way that felt deliberate. We didn't suddenly become a couple in the way people expect. No announcements. No sweeping gestures. Just a quiet reorientation. Matthew started keeping a spare toothbrush at my place without comment. I stopped assuming I'd go home alone. We cooked together more than we ordered in. We learned each other's mornings, how long it took him to wake up, how I needed silence before coffee. It felt dangerously close to permanence. That scared me in ways I didn't want to admit. One night, lying awake beside him, I caught myself cataloging exits, imagining what it would look like if this ended cleanly, if we stayed friends, if I didn't let it go too far. The old reflexes didn't vanish just because I named them. Matthew was asleep, turned slightly toward me, one arm heavy across my waist like it belonged there. I stared at the ceiling and wondered how many good things I'd already talked myself out of in my life just because they didn't hurt enough. The moment that forced the issue came sooner than I expected. We ran into someone I'd dated, one of the loud, charming, half-present guys from my past at a bar with friends. He greeted me like no time had passed, all easy confidence and familiar smiles. I felt Matthew's hand at the small of my back, light but unmistakable. The old version of me would have enjoyed the attention, would have liked being wanted in that sharp, performative way. Instead, all I felt was distance, like watching an old habit from the outside. Later, outside in the cool air, Matthew asked, "You okay?" I nodded, then hesitated. I think I used to confuse intensity with meaning. He didn't respond right away, just looked at me with that steady patience I was starting to understand as a choice. "What do you think it is now?" I took a breath. Consistency. Care. Someone staying when there's no audience. He smiled, not triumphant, not relieved. Just present. That's what I'm good at. And suddenly, I was terrified of how much that mattered. A few days later, I said it, not dramatically, not all at once. We were sitting on the floor of my living room, backs against the couch, half watching something neither of us cared about. "I think I kept you as my safe option," I said quietly. "Because if I never chose you, I never had to risk losing you." Matthew didn't interrupt, didn't pull away. "I'm sorry," I added, "for not seeing you clearly sooner." He turned toward me then. "I didn't want to be chosen out of fear," he said gently. "I wanted to be chosen on purpose." I swallowed. "I am." The words felt heavier than "I love you" would have. More precise, more honest. We sat there for a long time after, shoulders touching, the room quiet around us. I didn't feel resolved. I felt committed to staying awake inside my own life, even when it was uncomfortable. For the first time, I wasn't asking myself how to keep things from changing. I was asking myself how to show up for them. And that felt like the real beginning. Choosing Matthew didn't feel like a finish line. It felt like learning a new posture, one that took practice. There were days I slipped. Days I went quiet instead of explaining. Days I felt the itch to pull back when things felt too settled, too known. The difference was, this time I noticed it. And instead of disappearing, I named it. Matthew never punished me for that honesty. He didn't reward it either. He just met it steady as ever. One night, months in, we were brushing our teeth side by side, half asleep, bumping elbows in the cramped bathroom. I caught our reflection without meaning to. Nothing cinematic. No dramatic lighting. Just two men sharing space like it was normal. And it hit me, sharp and sudden. This was the life I used to think was boring. I smiled around my toothbrush like an idiot. The real test came quietly, the way all real tests do. I got an offer, new job, new city. The kind of opportunity past me would have grabbed without hesitation, calling it ambition when it was really escape. I didn't tell Matthew right away. Not because I didn't trust him, but because I was scared of what his presence meant for my decision. When I finally did, We sat at the kitchen table long after dinner had gone cold. I told him everything. The excitement, the fear, the part of me that still believed choosing someone meant giving something up. He listened. Then he said, "What do you want? No guilt, no pressure, no claim on me." That was the moment I understood love wasn't about being someone's anchor. It was about being someone's place to return to. I turned the job down. Not heroically, not instantly, just honestly. Because the life I was building here didn't feel like something I needed to outrun. Now, when I think about the phrase safe option dash, it makes me wince a little. Not because Matthew ever was one, but because I was wrong about what safety meant. I thought it was the absence of feeling, the lack of risk, the guarantee of no pain. I know better now. Safety is being seen without being chased, being chosen without being cornered. It's the quiet courage of staying when walking away would be easier. Matthew is asleep beside me as I think this, one hand resting on my chest like it's always known where to land. The room is still. My mind is calm. I didn't fall in love with him in a rush. I arrived there slowly, carefully, by noticing, by staying, by choosing him back. And this time, I'm not confusing peace for emptiness. I finally understand the difference.